November 4th, 1944 dawned cold and gray over the Philippine Sea, but aboard the USS Tang, Commander Richard O'Kane felt a familiar surge of anticipation coursing through his veins. The submarine had already earned its fearsome reputation as a destroyer killer throughout the Pacific theater, but what would unfold over the next 4 days would cement its place in naval warfare history and send shockwaves through the Imperial Japanese Navy command structure. O'Kane stood in the conning tower, his weathered hands gripping the periscope handles as Tang prowled beneath the surface like a predatory shark. The submarine had departed from Pearl Harbor weeks earlier with a singular mission: disrupt Japanese supply lines in the Formosa Strait, a vital shipping corridor that connected the Japanese home islands to their resource-rich southern territories. The stakes could not have been higher. Japan's war machine desperately needed oil, rubber, and raw materials from Southeast Asia, and the Tang represented one of America's most potent weapons in strangling that lifeline. The submarine itself was a marvel of American engineering and industrial might, measuring over 300 feet in length and displacing more than 1,500 tons when submerged. The Tang belonged to the Balao-class submarines that represented the cutting edge of underwater warfare technology. Her diesel-electric propulsion system allowed for extended patrols, while her arsenal of 24 Mark 14 torpedoes gave her devastating striking power. But technology alone did not make the Tang legendary. It was the crew's exceptional training and O'Kane's tactical brilliance that transformed the vessel into what Japanese sailors would come to fear as a ghost ship. Commander O'Kane had already proven himself as one of the most aggressive and successful submarine commanders in the United States Navy. His philosophy was simple yet terrifying for his enemies: close the distance, strike hard, and vanish before counterattacks could materialize. Unlike some commanders who preferred to launch torpedoes from maximum range, O'Kane regularly brought his submarine to within 1,000 yards of enemy vessels, sometimes even closer. This dangerous tactic increased hit probability but left little margin for error. According to naval historians and accounts preserved in the Naval History and Heritage Command Archives, O'Kane had developed his aggressive tactics during his time as executive officer under the legendary Dudley Mush Morton aboard the USS Wahoo. Morton's bold approach to submarine warfare had revolutionized American tactics in the Pacific, and O'Kane had absorbed every lesson, refining them into his own lethal methodology. As the Tang patrolled the Formosa Strait approaches on that November morning, lookouts spotted smoke on the horizon. O'Kane ordered the submarine to periscope depth, and what he saw through the lens made his pulse quicken. A Japanese convoy, heavily laden with cargo and escorted by warships, was steaming directly into his patrol zone. The commander quickly calculated ranges, speeds, and approach angles. The convoy represented a target-rich environment, exactly the kind of opportunity that aggressive submarine commanders dreamed about. O'Kane knew the next several hours would test every skill his crew possessed, and he intended to make the Japanese Navy pay dearly for venturing into his hunting grounds. The afternoon of November 4th transformed the Philippine Sea into a battlefield, where silence meant survival and sound meant death. Commander O'Kane maneuvered the Tang into an optimal attack position, balancing the need for stealth with the requirement to intercept the convoy before it passed beyond his operational zone. The Japanese formation consisted of multiple cargo vessels surrounded by escort destroyers, their propellers churning the water as they maintained their protective screen around the precious merchantman. Inside the Tang, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. Torpedomen stood ready at their stations, their hands resting on firing mechanisms that would soon unleash devastation. The submarine's fire control team worked frantically, calculating torpedo spread angles and depth settings. O'Kane had trained his crew relentlessly for moments exactly like this, drilling them until their responses became instinctive. Every man aboard understood that their survival depended on executing their duties with precision, while the commander made split-second tactical decisions. O'Kane waited patiently, allowing the convoy to draw nearer. Through his periscope, he could now distinguish individual vessels, cargo ships riding low in the water, indicating they were heavily loaded with war materials desperately needed by Japanese forces throughout the Pacific. The sight reinforced his determination. Every ship he sank represented weapons that would never reach Japanese soldiers, aircraft that would never fly, and fuel that would never power enemy warships. At precisely 1400 hours, O'Kane gave the order that would initiate the Tang's remarkable 4-day rampage. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. The submarine shuddered as compressed air ejected the Mark 14 torpedoes from their tubes. The weapons streaked through the water at 46 knots, their wakeless electric motors driving them toward the unsuspecting targets. O'Kane kept his eye pressed to the periscope, counting down the seconds until impact. The first torpedo struck a large cargo vessel amidships, the explosion tearing through the hull below the waterline. A massive geyser of seawater and debris erupted skyward as the ship's structural integrity collapsed. Within minutes, the vessel began listing heavily to port. The second torpedo found its mark on another merchantman, this one carrying what appeared to be military vehicles on its deck. The detonation ignited secondary explosions as fuel tanks ruptured and ammunition cooked off, transforming the ship into a floating inferno. Chaos erupted throughout the convoy. Escort destroyers immediately began executing anti-submarine protocols, their crews rushing to battle stations. Depth charges splashed into the water as Japanese commanders tried desperately to locate and destroy the unseen attacker, but O'Kane had anticipated this response. Even as the first torpedoes were still traveling toward their targets, he had ordered the Tang to dive deep and execute evasive maneuvers. The submarine descended rapidly, passing through thermocline's temperature layers in the ocean that could deflect sonar signals and help mask the Tang's position. The crew rigged for silent running, shutting down all non-essential equipment and moving with exaggerated care to avoid creating any sound that might give away their location. Men stood motionless at their stations, barely breathing as depth charges exploded around them. Each detonation sent shockwaves through the hull, causing light bulbs to shatter and cork insulation to rain down from overhead pipes. O'Kane remained calm, his experience telling him that the depth charges were exploding too far away to cause serious damage. The Japanese escorts were dropping their weapons in a search pattern, hoping to get lucky rather than prosecuting an actual sonar contact. As darkness fell on November 4th, the Tang surfaced several miles from the convoy's last known position. Commander O'Kane ordered the diesel engines brought online to recharge the submarine's batteries and replenish the air supply throughout the vessel. The crew breathed easier now, though they remained at battle stations. Every man knew this was merely a temporary reprieve. O'Kane had no intention of breaking contact with the convoy. The commander climbed to the bridge, scanning the horizon with binoculars as the submarine's diesel engines rumbled beneath his feet. The night sky revealed countless stars, their light reflecting off the gentle swells. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of fires still burning on the stricken Japanese vessels. 2 confirmed kills in a single attack represented an excellent start, but O'Kane's aggressive nature demanded more. He knew other ships from the convoy remained afloat, and he intended to hunt them down. Throughout the night, the Tang pursued the scattered convoy remnants. Japanese commanders had ordered the remaining vessels to disperse and make maximum speed for safer waters, but this defensive tactic actually made O'Kane's job easier. Concentrated convoys with multiple escorts presented formidable defensive capabilities, but scattered individual ships became vulnerable prey for a determined submarine commander. As dawn broke on November 5th, lookouts spotted another target, a medium-sized cargo vessel attempting to reach the relative safety of coastal waters where shallow depths would prevent submarine attacks. O'Kane ordered the Tang to intercept, pushing the submarine's diesel engines to maximum output. The race was on, and the commander calculated that he had perhaps 2 hours before the Japanese ship would enter, waters too shallow for the Tang to operate safely. The pursuit showcased the Tang's superior speed and endurance. The submarine gradually closed the distance, staying on the surface to maintain maximum velocity. When the range decreased to approximately 3,000 yards, O'Kane ordered a crash dive. The submarine's bow tilted downward sharply as negative buoyancy flooded the ballast tanks. Within 60 seconds, the Tang had vanished beneath the waves, approaching its target from below like a creature from the depths. This attack demonstrated O'Kane's tactical flexibility. Rather than executing a traditional broadside torpedo spread, He maneuvered the Tang into a position directly astern of the cargo vessel. This stern chase position required precise speed matching and distance estimation, but it offered a significant advantage. The target's propellers created acoustic noise that masked the submarine's approach, and the ship presented its entire length as a target profile. At 0900 hours, O'Kane fired a single torpedo. The economy of using only one weapon reflected his confidence in the shot geometry and his awareness that the Tang would need every remaining torpedo for future engagements. The Mark 14 ran true, striking the cargo ship's stern and destroying its rudder and propulsion system. The vessel wallowed helplessly, dead in the water. O'Kane circled at periscope depth, observing as the crew abandoned ship. Only after confirming the merchantman was doomed did he order the Tang to depart, hunting for additional targets. Historical records maintained by the Submarine Force Library and Museum document that O'Kane's third kill of the patrol occurred later that same afternoon. The evening of November 5th presented Commander O'Kane with his most challenging tactical situation yet. Intelligence reports intercepted by the Tang's radio operators indicated that a high-value target, Japanese tanker escorted by 2 destroyers, would be transiting through the strait after sunset. Tankers represented priority targets for American submarines because they carried the petroleum products that fueled Japan's military operations. Without oil, Japanese aircraft could not fly, warships could not sail, and armored divisions could not maneuver. O'Kane understood the risks inherent in attacking a heavily escorted tanker. Japanese destroyer crews had grown increasingly proficient at anti-submarine warfare as the war progressed. They employed sophisticated search patterns, possessed improved sonar equipment, and carried deadly depth-charge arsenals. Attacking such a formation required either exceptional courage or exceptional recklessness. O'Kane possessed both qualities in abundance, tempered by tactical genius that had kept him alive through numerous combat patrols. The commander positioned the Tang along the tanker's projected course, submerging in relatively shallow water where thermal layers would provide some protection from Japanese sonar. The submarine settled onto the bottom, engines silenced, as the crew waited in darkness. Men whispered to one another, their voices barely audible even in the confined spaces. The waiting was always the hardest part, hours of tension punctuated by moments of violent action. Shortly after 2100 hours, the Tang sonar operator detected the distinctive acoustic signature of multiple screws approaching. O'Kane ordered the submarine to periscope depth, risking detection to visually confirm the target. Through the lens, he saw exactly what intelligence had promised: a large fleet tanker flanked by 2 destroyers, their searchlights occasionally sweeping the dark water in search of threats. What happened next would become one of the most discussed engagements in submarine warfare history. Rather than attacking from a safe distance, O'Kane made a decision that seemed to border on madness. He ordered the Tang to surface and approach the convoy at high speed on the surface. The submarine's low profile and the darkness would provide some concealment, and the bold maneuver would allow O'Kane to close to point-blank range before the Japanese could react. The Tang surged forward through the night, her diesel engines roaring as she accelerated to 80 knots. Lookouts on the bridge spotted the Tang simultaneously with the submarine's final approach. Alarm bells rang across the Japanese formation as gunners rushed to their weapons. Searchlight beams swept across the water, one beam momentarily illuminating the Tang's conning tower before the submarine altered course. At a range of less than 800 yards, a distance so close that torpedo malfunction became a genuine concern, O'Kane fired a full spread of 4 torpedoes. The weapons crossed the short distance in seconds. 3 found their marks on the tanker, while the 4th struck one of the escorting destroyers. The explosions lit up the night sky as thousands of gallons of petroleum ignited, transforming the tanker into a floating crematorium. The destroyer, struck near its magazine, simply disintegrated in a catastrophic secondary explosion that sent debris raining down across hundreds of yards. The surviving destroyer immediately turned toward the Tang, intent on ramming the submarine. The damaged destroyer charged toward the Tang like an enraged bull, its captain determined to avenge his comrades by crushing the American submarine beneath his ship's bow. Commander O'Kane had mere seconds to make a decision that would determine whether his crew lived or died. The destroyer's superior surface speed gave it a significant advantage in any surface engagement, and its deck guns were already traversing toward the Tang's exposed conning tower. "Emergency dive, all ahead flank." O'Kane's voice cut through the chaos with practiced calm that belied the mortal danger. The bridge crew scrambled down the hatch as seawater began flooding the ballast tanks. The submarine's bow tilted sharply downward, and the Tang plunged beneath the waves just as the destroyer's forward guns opened fire. Shells splashed into the water where the submarine had been moments before, their detonations sending shockwaves through the hull. The Tang dove deep, her crew silent and motionless as the destroyer passed overhead. The sound of the enemy ship's propellers filled the submarine with a terrifying thrashing noise that seemed to shake the very rivets holding the hull together. Then came the depth charges, methodically spaced explosions that walked a pattern across the Tang's estimated position. Each detonation felt like a massive hammer striking the submarine's hull. Light fixtures shattered, gauge faces cracked, and men grabbed whatever handholds they could find to keep from being thrown against bulkheads. O'Kane ordered a series of radical course changes, zigging and zagging through the water to throw off the destroyer's attack pattern. The submarine descended to test depth, the maximum safe operating depth, before water pressure threatened to crush the hull. At this extreme depth, every creak and groan of stressed metal reminded the crew of the thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch pressing against their fragile steel shell. The Japanese destroyer commander proved persistent and skilled. For over an hour, the enemy warship prosecuted its attack, dropping depth charges and listening for any sound that might betray the Tang's position. O'Kane countered by reducing speed to bare steerage way, minimizing noise while slowly opening the distance from his attacker. The submarine's crew remained at silent running stations, communicating only through hand signals and written notes. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the sound of the destroyer's propellers began to fade. The Japanese captain, running low on depth charges and concerned about his own vulnerability to submarine attack, broke off the engagement. O'Kane waited another 30 minutes before cautiously rising to periscope depth. Through the lens, he saw the burning tanker still aflame on the horizon, but no sign of the surviving destroyer. The Tang surfaced after confirming the area was clear. Damage assessment revealed minor issues, some shattered light bulbs, a few small leaks that the damage control parties could easily repair, and frayed nerves among the crew. But the submarine remained fully operational and still carried a deadly payload of torpedoes. According to detailed patrol reports preserved at the National Archives, O'Kane logged this engagement as his fourth and fifth confirmed kills of the patrol, bringing the Tang's 4-day total to 5 vessels destroyed. The commander gathered his officers in the wardroom to assess their situation. The Tang had expended more than half its torpedo inventory and had been operating in hostile waters for days without rest. November 6th arrived with deteriorating weather conditions that provided both curse and blessing for the Tang's continued operations. Heavy cloud cover and rough seas reduced visibility, making it harder to spot targets but also providing additional concealment from Japanese search aircraft and surface patrols. Commander O'Kane knew the Imperial Japanese Navy would be actively hunting for the submarine responsible for devastating their convoy routes, and he understood that his aggressive tactics had placed the Tang squarely in their crosshairs. The submarine spent the daylight hours of November 6th submerged, moving slowly through the patrol zone while conserving battery power and giving the crew much-needed rest. Men rotated through their watch stations, grabbing sleep when possible in the cramped bunks stacked 3 high throughout the vessel. The cook prepared hot meals, and the aroma of coffee and food helped restore morale after the previous day's harrowing depth charge attack. But O'Kane was not a commander who believed in passive defense or premature withdrawal. Despite having already achieved remarkable success, he continued to study charts and intelligence reports, looking for opportunities to strike additional blows against Japanese shipping. His operations officer suggested they might consider heading for safer waters, but O'Kane dismissed the recommendation with characteristic directness. The Tang had been sent to disrupt enemy supply lines, and as long as the submarine remained combat capable and carried torpedoes, he intended to fulfill that mission. As afternoon turned to evening, radio intercepts provided tantalizing intelligence about another convoy preparing to transit the strait. This formation reportedly included troop transports carrying reinforcements to Japanese garrisons in the Philippines. For O'Kane, the opportunity to sink ships filled with enemy soldiers represented an even higher priority than attacking cargo vessels. Every Japanese soldier who never reached the Philippines was one less enemy American ground forces would face in the brutal island-hopping campaign. The Tang positioned itself along the anticipated transit route, and O'Kane ordered the submarine to periscope depth as darkness fell. The wait proved shorter than expected. Within 2 hours, lookouts reported multiple contacts approaching from the northwest. Through his periscope, O'Kane counted at least 4 large vessels surrounded by an escort screen of destroyers and smaller patrol craft. The formation was maintaining strict light discipline, showing no running lights that might betray their position to enemy submarines. What O'Kane could not have known was that Japanese naval commanders had indeed anticipated further submarine attacks and had prepared a trap. The convoy he now stalked included not just transports but also several destroyers specifically tasked with aggressive anti-submarine operations. The Japanese were no longer simply defending their convoys, they were actively trying to lure American submarines into engagement so they could destroy them. The Tang approached the convoy with characteristic aggression, maneuvering for a favorable attack position. O'Kane selected as targets carefully 2 large transports that appeared to be riding low in the water, suggesting they were heavily loaded with troops and equipment. He calculated firing solutions that would allow for a rapid attack followed by immediate evasion. The tactical situation required perfect timing and execution. At 2200 hours on November 6th, O'Kane gave the firing order. The Tang shuddered as 4 torpedoes left their tubes in quick succession. The commander immediately ordered the submarine to turn away and dive, not waiting to observe the results of his attack. The explosions that followed Commander O'Kane's attack on November 6th created pandemonium within the Japanese convoy. At least 2 of the Tang's torpedoes found their marks, striking transports packed with soldiers destined for the Philippine battlefields. The detonations ripped through the vessels below the waterline, flooding compartments and causing catastrophic structural failure. Hundreds of Japanese troops found themselves plunged into darkness as the ship's electrical systems failed, then thrown into the cold Pacific waters as the vessels listed and sank. But this time, the Japanese response proved far more coordinated and dangerous than previous engagements. The escort destroyers had been expecting submarine attack and immediately executed well-rehearsed anti-submarine tactics. Multiple ships converged on the Tang's last known position, their sonar operators working frantically to establish contact with the submerged submarine. Within minutes, the first depth charges began falling, and these attacks showed a level of precision that exceeded anything O'Kane had previously experienced during this patrol. The Tang twisted and turned through the depths, executing every evasive maneuver in O'Kane's considerable playbook. But the Japanese destroyers maintained contact, their sonar pinging relentlessly against the submarine's hull. The depth charge attacks came in waves, each pattern expertly placed to bracket the Tang's position. The explosions grew closer, their concussive force throwing men off their feet and causing equipment to fail throughout the submarine. A particularly close detonation caused a seal to fail on one of the Tang's main ballast tanks, creating a leak that began slowly flooding a compartment. Damage control teams rushed to contain the problem, working in near darkness lit only by emergency lighting. The submarine's chief of the boat, a grizzled veteran of multiple war patrols, directed the repair efforts with calm efficiency even as depth charges continued to rain down around them. For 3 hours, the Tang endured one of the most intense depth charge attacks of the Pacific War. O'Kane later estimated that Japanese destroyers dropped more than 100 depth charges during this engagement. The submarine's hull developed numerous small leaks, electrical systems failed in several compartments, and the crew's nerves stretched to the breaking point. Some men prayed quietly, others stared straight ahead with expressions of grim determination, but none panicked. O'Kane's training and leadership had prepared them for exactly this situation. The commander made a calculated gamble. Rather than continuing to evade at depth where the Japanese clearly had the Tang bracketed, He ordered the submarine to descend to maximum test depth and then execute a radical course change at high speed. The maneuver was dangerous. The pressure at such depths left no margin for error, and the speed would create noise that the Japanese sonar could easily detect. But O'Kane was betting that the enemy destroyers would not expect such an aggressive move from a submarine under heavy attack. The gamble paid off. The Tang's sudden sprint at extreme depth carried the submarine outside the destroyer's search pattern. By the time Japanese commanders realized what had happened and repositioned their ships, the Tang had opened enough distance to break sonar contact. O'Kane kept the submarine deep and quiet for another 2 hours before finally rising to periscope depth and confirming the area was clear. The Tang surfaced shortly after midnight on November 7th, and O'Kane conducted a thorough damage assessment. The morning of November 7th found the Tang and her crew battered, but unbroken, still operational despite the intense punishment inflicted by Japanese depth charges. Commander O'Kane faced a decision that would test his judgment against his aggressive instincts. The submarine had achieved extraordinary success. 5 confirmed enemy vessels destroyed in just 4 days of intense combat operations. The Tang's torpedo inventory stood depleted, with only a handful of weapons remaining in the tubes. The crew was exhausted, the submarine had sustained damage requiring repair, and Japanese anti-submarine forces were now actively hunting for them throughout the strait. Most submarine commanders would have considered the patrol complete and set course for Pearl Harbor to rearm and refit. But O'Kane remained focused on one final opportunity to strike at Japanese shipping before departing the patrol zone. Intelligence reports indicated another small convoy would be transiting the area, and the commander believed the Tang could manage one more attack before withdrawing from hostile waters. His officers received this decision with mixed reactions. Some supported their commander's aggressive philosophy without reservation, while others privately worried that O'Kane was pushing their luck too far. The executive officer diplomatically suggested that they had already achieved remarkable success, and perhaps discretion might be the better part of valor. O'Kane listened to these concerns, considered them seriously, but ultimately decided to position the Tang for one final engagement. On the evening of November 7th, the submarine intercepted a small convoy consisting of 2 cargo vessels and a single escort destroyer. O'Kane maneuvered into attack position, carefully calculating torpedo spreads with the few remaining weapons in his arsenal. The attack proceeded smoothly. The Tang fired its remaining forward torpedoes at the cargo vessels from a range of 1,200 yards, then turned to bring its stern tubes to bear on the destroyer. 2 torpedoes struck the cargo vessels, sending both to the bottom. But when O'Kane fired at the destroyer, something went catastrophically wrong. One of the stern torpedoes, possibly damaged during the previous day's depth charging or potentially suffering from the mechanical problems that plagued early Mark 14 torpedoes, ran erratic. Instead of tracking toward the destroyer, the weapon curved back toward the Tang itself. The crew had only seconds to react as lookouts spotted the torpedo's phosphorescent wake approaching their own submarine. O'Kane ordered emergency speed and a hard turn, but the Tang could not maneuver quickly enough. The torpedo struck the submarine's stern, exploding with devastating force. The blast killed several crew members instantly and flooded the aft compartments. The Tang began sinking rapidly, giving men barely enough time to escape the dying submarine. Of the 87 crew members aboard the Tang, only 9 survived, including Commander O'Kane. The survivors spent hours in the water before being captured by Japanese forces and spending the remainder of the war as prisoners. Despite the tragic end to the patrol, O'Kane's remarkable 4-day rampage had demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of aggressive submarine warfare. The Tang's final patrol sank more Japanese shipping tonnage than most submarines achieved in their entire service careers. Commander Richard O'Kane survived captivity and after the war received the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary heroism and tactical brilliance. The Tang's story became legendary within the submarine service, studied at the Naval Academy and submarine schools as an example of both the potential and the perils of aggressive undersea warfare. The submarine's 5 confirmed kills in just 4 days of November 1944 shocked Japanese naval commanders and contributed significantly to the strangling of Japan's maritime supply lines, that ultimately helped win the Pacific War.